Hello. Welcome to my place. Shall we watch Doctor Who? Well, I'm going to, so you may as well join me, and I'll chat to you. I'll throw in some thoughts, facts, observations, probably a few mistakes as well. Who cares? But I've got a friend to choose the story that we're going to watch. This friend has also nominated their favourite things about this particular adventure, one per episode and one bonus one. And as we watch, we've got to guess what they might be and remind ourselves, in a world gripped with madness, pestilence and umbrage, that Doctor Who takes us to our happy times and places. Okay, well, before we watch episode 2, let's remind ourselves of the story we're watching, the reason it was chosen, and by whom.
Good. Hello, Toby, and incidentally, hello to all of you at home. My name is Tom Burgess. I'm arguably a comedian, and to one audience that really sticks out in my memory, passionately arguably not. But fortunately, the world being what it is at the moment, it seems unlikely I'll ever be able to gig to them again. Now, I'm recording this message for you entirely on location, because the story I've picked for you to watch, Toby, is the Sontaran Experiment. I think the reason I've chosen this one really is that it's the first Doctor Who story of the original run I ever saw back in 1998 on VHS. I was 6 years old, and I think even if it hadn't been coupled up with Genesis of the Daleks in that double video pack, I still would have come out of it a huge fan. So I think it's really easy to take a two-part story for granted, especially when it's sandwiched between two of the all-time greats. But there's loads to enjoy in it. And to make that point even clearer, I'm actually going to tell you at the end of all this 2 things per episode I love.
Well, welcome back to my gaff. It's going to be episode 2 of the Sontaran Experiment. It'll be torture. Quiet at the back. Press play now. Interesting, I was musing about I haven't had time to look it up, the Rodney Bennett and Grange Hill thing. I know there was a reason. I'd either thought it was the case and discovered it wasn't the case. And it's a terrible thing when I've interviewed people now. Because I'd read this, I'd read Doctor Who magazine, I'd watch these things, I'd soak up this stuff and commit it to memory. That's why I know that Glyn Jones is Glyn Johns in the Doctor Who episode guide in Doctor Who magazine for this particular issue. But when you're interviewing somebody, you've got your eye on everything, on the next question, on making sure it's all recorded. But actually, I don't take any of it in when I'm doing the interview. Then I hate listening to myself afterwards. So I think there's probably stuff, if you've listened to my podcast, you probably know more about what the people who made it think than I do. Now, it is a very good mask. I prefer the Lynx mask because I like the bristle, I like the closeness of it to his skin, and it's a better fix to Kevin Lindsay's face, and I like the prickly beard that he has. But this is a good mask. It's like the Golem, as you look the same, except you don't, because the actor who played you had breathing difficulties with the last mask, so we've made one that's a bit airier. Identical? No, I'm not. And nor it's not as bad as the Invasion of Time, where the same Sontaran looks different between studio sessions. Storr has almost a moustache in one set of studio sessions and not in the other. No, in the OB sessions he has it's got different makeup. But I remember in the book, Harry thinks that Style looks like the Golem, and I get that. Poor old Roth. It's sort of, he served his purpose, and he's killed. But I love that. Why did you make that disagreeable noise? And that sort of bluntness is horrible. And what does he say? The moron was of no fun. So he is quite mean, but he's quite deadpan with his meanness. And I love the way he holds her face. Yeah, where he does that, he treats her like a sort of specimen. And Kevin Lindsay as Steyr is great. I mean, he's off the back of playing Lynx, which is one of the very best man in a monster costume performances in the whole of Doctor Who, I think. But we'll come to that when we talk about the Time Warrior at some point. I love his reaction to this. He's not very happy to see you. He's brilliant. He's such a sort of gleeful troublemaker. Obtuse. I've said it 3 times there. Obtuse is the new verisimilitude. You heard it here first, folks. I didn't quite understand in the book. The book is quite a sort of sweaty, headachy affair with lots of sort of parched throats and people, stumbling about blindly. He's very visceral, Ian Marter, when he writes the books, which I found quite unpalatable as a youngster. I preferred them to be slightly sort of easier to experience. I found his books a bit much, and there were ones I had to sort of take a run up to. Give me a break. I started reading them quite early, but I definitely found the Terence Dicks ones more accessible than the Malcolm Hulks and certainly the Ian Marters. But I remember how he fleshed out in the book. But I was too young to get that the prisoner, this prisoner here, played by Brian Ellis. Oh yeah, but Peter Walsh and Terry Walsh, and you've got Brian Ellis, who is in Mask of Mandragora, also directed by Rodney Bennett. But in Revenge of the Cybermen, in a couple of stories' time, there is Brian Grelis. So you've got Brian Ellis, Brian Grelis, Peter Walsh, Terry Walsh. There are only a certain amount of names to go around. That nobody's actually told this prisoner to be South African, though. I suppose it doesn't really matter. And that's only just occurred to me. It's never bothered me before. And it's really horrible, this. But I thought Roth had been sort of baked by the laser gun and sort of left to die, and that was who Harry had found. I hadn't picked up on the fact that he was an. I read a lot of them. It was only when I came to the books the second time round that I understood all of them, because I was reading stuff that was above my reading age. But that's okay. I still had a great time, and I learnt stuff, and I learnt some stuff that was wrong. But then I went back to them because, Doctor Who rewards repeat visitings, which is why this is probably the 21st, 22nd time I've seen this. That seems bizarre, isn't it? I've never read The Mill on the Floss, but I've seen the Sontaran Experiment over 20 times. And you know what? I don't care. It's whatever gets you through this life. And Doctor Who's got me through thick and thin. I like Kevin Lindsay's diction because he was an Australian. And he's an Australian doing RP, which gives him this slightly pinched kind of, because he's trying to slightly flatten out his. He's trying to sort of anglicise his colonial colonial vowels. But instead of being Australian, he's sort of flattened them out a bit and gone the moron was of no feather. So it's slightly pinched, and it works, and it gives the Sontarans. Well, I mean, it's certainly better than Derek Deadwood in Invasion of the Time, who is an avowed Cockney, and Clinton Green in Two Doctors. I would dearly love to kill you, Doctor, is very Welsh. Very good force field acting here and just that very simple sound effect and the modulation of the sound effect, the fact that it gets more intense as he pushes. It's just a lovely, simple way of selling that illusion. Well done, everybody. Knock his bally head off. She's so good. And I love these rocky outcrops that they've got. And again, because I think they planned to have some interiors, didn't they? I think a hut for the gal set guys and perhaps the inside of the spaceship. I know they wanted some interiors, but instead they just sort of built it all into the landscape. And why not? Why wouldn't Steyer get his space telly out of his ship so he can just, you can have it at an important vantage point or whatever. And again, this is good. This is very clever use of resources because yes, the Sontarans are identical. So you've got Kevin Lindsay playing both characters, which makes up for the fact that he's barely in episode 1. It's weird. I've seen him in the odd episode of Z-Cars and things like that. I remember seeing something advertised saying Robert Lindsay stars in, and I was like, oh, Robert. And so for ages, Robert Lindsay and Kevin Lindsay were slightly interchangeable for me, but of course they're very different beasts. I've seen Kevin Lindsay in sort of things like Z-Cars and stuff. And he's a sort of, he's a character actor of the time. He was a milkman in an advert as well, wasn't he? He had quite a famous advertising campaign. But I think this was his last job. He died in 1975. I think a couple of months after this was broadcast. In fact, I think Elizabeth Sladen said that it was when they were recording Pyramids of Mars that the news came through that he died. That's a good snake for a very short effect. And Kevin Lindsay's partner was Trevor Bentham, who, you won't find this in any Doctor Who magazines, who was the stage manager of the Royal Court Theatre. I think he was the stage manager of the Royal Court Theatre. Is that right? Who later became the partner of the actor Sir Nigel Hawthorne. And when Nigel Hawthorne died, it was terrible because they were a gay couple, but I think it predated civil partnerships, or certainly there was an inheritance issue, and Trevor Bentham, I think, had to sell up their property that they'd lived in together as a couple because of archaic and silly laws. Thankfully, we've moved on, and that's relatively recent history. Elizabeth Sladen did all of that fear brilliantly. Barry Letts said, didn't he, when she auditioned, lots of actresses were good at being scared and lots of actresses were good at being brave, and she was scared whilst being brave, and that's a very good summation of the attitude that she brings to it, which really helps with the drama all the time, is that she's gutsy in spite of the fact that she's terrified. So my brothers and sister were wrong. I mean, they were young as well, but they were wrong. I do quite like the little spin that he does, and then it's the same shot, isn't it? He actually reacts early to that gunshot, but I think it was the same shot as when he shot Roth. Worm. And I think that was the advert break on Super Channel. So again, I didn't really get that shot of his of the Doctor's body because it was sort of turned into the caption. So those bits all came quite late to me. I remember my copy of Mordrin Undead, for some reason, it had the opening titles of episode 1, but then didn't have the first shot. It was a funny jump, but I didn't know. And it was only, again, years and years later that I realised I'd been missing the first 3 seconds of it or whatever. Now, oh, come on, Viril, don't give yourself away. I mean, Donald Douglas does a very good job with that. Donald Douglas is an excellent actor. Bridget Jones, he's in the Bridget Jones movies. He lives in France. He was in Poldark. There was a lovely thing, I was going to say recently, but it was probably 20 years ago, where, because he and Robin Ellis, who played Poldark in Poldark, I think both live in the same vicinity, and there's a bit where Donald Douglas sort of surprised him in character, for a thing. Maybe it was for a launch of something Poldarky, but that was quite nice that they live the same place. But I was lucky. I'm on the Blu-ray of this because I'm cheap and available, I think, and there was a gap, and I was helping them out. So I was able to do a Who's Round with Donald Douglas when he was interviewed for I mean, I just basically asked him when he came in, and I okayed it with Ed Stradley, who directed the documentary, because Donald Douglas was high on my list because he's had such an illustrious career. Is it the ABC Murders of the Poirot that he's in? He's in all sorts of stuff. He was even Ruth's hot dad in EastEnders. Remember Ruth, Mark Fowler's wife? I used to practice saying, I am Field Major Stein of the Sontaran G3 Military Assessment Service. I used to say that. I used to practice. I used to play. I used to act. Play act. My idea of fun was to fantasize about playing a doctor, being a Doctor Who actor. It's pretty grim, isn't it? What I said about Philip Hinchcliffe wanting muscular storytelling. I know this season was, influenced by the commissioning and all that sort of thing of the previous regime, but you can tell, you can't imagine Barry Letts and Terence Dicks having this amount of torture and this amount of sort of gutsiness, the sort of gutsiness that Holmes and Hinchcliffe bring, that I think really works. I remember all of this stuff was the stuff that when I was younger it didn't disappoint me in the way that stuff from other eras did. It matched or exceeded my imaginings, and I think that's because all of Hinchcliffe's productions are pretty good, and Holmes now knows as a script editor, I think, just keeps character and incident and little additions to the script that just keep it interesting or keep it real or keep it inventive. There's a lot of attention to detail, world building. To you lump of filth. They look great. They look really spaced out, these guys. And he's quite a genial looking fellow now, Peter Walsh. I've not met him. I was too late when they interviewed him for the Blu-ray, but I'm glad they got it. So otherwise, because if I do him, I would have done all three astronauts. Take that out of context. I've done all three astronauts because I've met all three astronauts from Mission to the Unknown. It's amazing this. I love this scene where he is destroying the android, which is quite sad. But it's not sad because I think the android is. If they'd done it in CSO, it wouldn't have worked. It would have stood out a mile. I don't even know if you could do CSO on location, but it would have looked awful. So, the decision not to do CSO, I suppose, helps. But I think the spindly legs on an obvious track. It's but I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive. But I was going to say we feel a bit sorry for the android. We shouldn't really feel sorry for the android. It's supposed to be a terrifying thing that captures and kills people. But Tom Baker does that beautifully. And of course, Tom Baker broke his collarbone in this, which is why often when he's charging about, it's Terry Walsh. Good job he was there to play Zake. And you can sort of tell, but they make a good stab of seeing as their leading man's fallen down a ravine. And Roger Murray Leach, the designer, who I've also interviewed. God, I'm a ball. But it amazes me if I said those things, I'm a largely disappointed man. But if I'd said any of those things I've just said to you about meeting all of these people and being in their vicinity, and my 10-year-old self would have been elated, stuck in the middle of nowhere, dreaming of, my uncle was once in a lift with Tom Baker, and I thought, because my uncle, he was my exciting uncle. He lived in London, and he's an editor, and so far away from any of the rest of us. The only one that had any sort of media stuff about him at all. He was once in a lift with Tom Baker, and I was amazed he was so blasé about it. It's like, well, hang on, why isn't this the best story you've ever told anybody? He's got a real bluntness about him as well. He's not always sort of glittery, Tom Baker. He can sometimes just do it a very straightforward delivery. Used to Earth's gravity. He's got such a brilliant face. Inspired casting. He is Doctor Who. But of course, and I think Roger Murray Leach said that Tom Baker was really worried because he's not long into the role. They haven't made many episodes with him, so if he's unable to do it, recast. Thank goodness they didn't. Well, I've broken a collarbone, and thank God he had this big coat and the scarf. I mean, that's the beauty of it's that sort of, I love that Shakespeare in love thing with Geoffrey Rush keeps going, it'll work, well, because it just does. The show goes on, the show must go on. And part of the joy of creativity is it all goes wrong, and sometimes you manage to make a good show, and sometimes because of the disasters you make a better show. I don't think Tom Baker breaking his collarbone helps Sontaran Experiment, but I certainly think they cover it very well, and especially as this major fight at the end. Neither of the two main characters are played by the actors that played them. It's two stunt doubles, because Kevin Lindsay had collapsed during the Time Warrior. He discovered he'd got a heart condition, and so he wasn't allowed to exert himself too much, and that was the heart condition that sadly killed him. Yeah, I think a couple of months after this was broadcast. How sad. And that's pretty, the crushing of the ribcage of the guy that helped him is pretty grim as well. The sort of torture element is very much the Robert Holmesy, Philip Hinchcliffe muscular storytelling. A nice touch from Ian Marter there to close his eyes as he tries to open the door, because you don't know, he would worry that this is a nice bit where the Doctor jumps on Star and knocks him over. Ow, because there's big rocks flying about there, and Terry Walsh actually doesn't do a bad job of mimicking the Doctor's gait that's been imposed upon Tom Baker. Burrell, I think, could get a better death. That's just, and I think that's why they really emphasise it later. Which goes, Burrell's dead. He saved your life. They make quite a meal of it, of just going. That bit where Burrell sort of got pushed over. He died. Whereas in the book, I think he falls down a great big ravine or crevasse, or he's chucked down a chasm, I think. And that's a shame, because I think I like Donald Douglas, and I think he deserved a better send-off. But yeah, there we are. He's got a great quality there, Tom, because he sort of, I know he refuses to be sentimental, but he's not glib. I think he does get a bit glib sometimes later on. I'm thinking of Vash in Full Circle, but I think he's just like. I remember I remember being quite rather liking the fact they'd gone to the effort to deflate Steyer's head, but I remember this was on the Tom Baker years, wasn't it? And I think they have him actually laughing in the corner. And I remember when I watched this at my friend Mark's house, when Mark and I shared a flat, his mate Steve was around, and Steve was really cool. Steve's in a band, and that bit. And Steve's not ill-disposed to Doctor Who. I think he thinks it's sort of, it's retro, it's all right, isn't it? But he thought that was awful. And I was like, so when you see Doctor Who through the eyes of other people, I've said it before, we see body horror where some people see sellotape. And I like the fact that you get the sort of Ark in Spacey music back at the end of this. It's a nice little tie-in. But because in the book, I think you get a load of time with Harry going through, don't you, through the spaceship, and there's millions of Sontarans rather than the two. And of course, yes, this is a two-parter, so I think this is a very perfunctory ending. But you always sort of forgave it because you go, well, it's only 50 minutes long. You can't tell a very complicated story in 50 minutes. Oh, how things have changed. He's that sort of playful, that sort of ghost of a smile that crosses his face. He's, I mean, if you can deflect an alien invasion just by telling a fairly thin fib, you know, I don't think the Earth's ever going to be in any trouble at all. I'm not sure if the Sontarans have gone to all that trouble of torturing people, which is that. I mean, that is pretty horrible. If after they've gone to all that trouble, just some bloke they've got no idea who he is looks ridiculous. I like this ending. Just comes and goes. Just don't bother invading. You go, call off the invasion, lads. I don't know what that was. I like the ending. The ending's as witty and fun as the arrival, which is which brings it full circle. What a jolly breeze. There's a mixture of stuff there because it is quite a jolly and economical story that sort of, you know, flies by, but it's got the grimness to it as well as the lightness of touch brought by the performances of the regulars. Looks good, isn't it? It's good. But what to choose is slightly more difficult because there aren't lots of different places and locations. There's not much not much variety in the cast. So I will have a think about what. I've also got to think about what, because we're even Stevens as well. But and I've got to choose. Now I just have to choose another two. Is that the rules? This is so early on in this podcast because I get them to choose a bonus one. But what's the bonus one for? It's just to make it another one. Does that help me or does that help them? So I will choose. No, so I think it gives a chance to change the score just at the end. I don't know. So I will choose. I think the torture stuff, which I think is, it's bringing quite a gutsy element to Doctor Who, and they do it well because I don't think it's gratuitous and I don't think it's horrible unless you think about it. And that's what Doctor Who does at its best, where actually your mind does a lot of the damage. And Steyer, Kevin Lindsay, mixture of mask and performance. Is that quite a boring thing for me to choose on? I tend to choose actors. Are there any other? I will choose the torture. The plot element of the torture, and Kevin Lindsay and Steyer just as a whole package. What has my friend Tom chosen?
So my first of two favourite things from part two is the scene where Steyer makes Sarah hallucinate and she sees the ground trying to swallow her up. I think that was probably the first time Doctor Who terrified me, but at the same time I remember being fascinated by that effect of the ground moving and the sound of it. At the same time as being scared, I wondered how they did that. And again, isn't Elizabeth Sladen just wonderful? And my second of two favourite things from part two is the effect when Steyer's head deflates. Again, how did they do that? I thought to myself. And it's a really lovely death that feels like it stands out now. Any old villain can get shot and burst into flames, but I really love seeing one just melt away into nothing. And my favourite bonus aspect of the story, I thought it was going to be that it was all on location, but actually it's going to be that it's all on location and on videotape. I've been thinking about it as I've been wandering around, and I think while you wouldn't want Doctor Who like that every single week, I really love that it's all on videotape. Yes, film is really atmospheric, isn't Spearhead from Space marvellous, etc, 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 but there's an immediacy about videotape. It really leaps out at you. If you're watching something on film, things don't move the same way that they do in real life, in your living room when you're watching it. When it's on videotape, it does. It looks exactly the same. There's something that that grabbed me about that a bit more. I really loved it.
Oh, isn't he lovely? And well, I mean, I started well. I got 1 in episode 1, and then I was a complete failure there. I've got to. I think I've got to keep my eye on what I choose, because I chose 2 really boring things, and that what he chose was much more interesting. I've got to keep my eye on that. I failed there, and Tom rightly, I think, is victorious in however the rules of this work, which I'm not quite sure of yet. Brinkmanship. His character Peter Fleming is utterly charming. He is a love letter to the sort of telly that people who like what we like love, and it's not cynical. It's beautifully performed. He's very lovable. He's just launched a podcast featuring the character as well. That's really nicely put together. So Tom as Peter Fleming is highly recommended if you like your archive telly, and also you have a sense of humour. It's such a sweet character. So thanks to Tom. Thanks to you for joining me on my sofa to watch the Sontaran Experiment. Let's do this again. Don't go changing. You understand? I'll see you next time. Ta-ta.
Well, I think that wraps up the Sontaran Experiment, doesn't it? I hope you enjoyed it, and if any of your viewers at home would like to see anything else I have to offer, please do look up Peter Fleming on Twitter. He is my comedy character. He is an entirely fictional, retired BBC children's pioneer whose classic shows like Professor Zaney's Mad Laboratory and Nicholas the Mischievous Cupboard have all sadly been wiped from the archives, presumably by mistake, and he's determined to find any copies again. Basically, if you're watching this, you'll probably like it, unless, as I've referenced before, if you live in Derbyshire. But statistically, that seems unlikely. Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely to speak to you, Toby. Bye bye.